Hey everybody, welcome to the videos for my first look for week 4 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. And keep in mind, I'm recording this video very early in the week, so things are going through change, so make sure you stay up to date. Check out the rest of the content throughout the week so you can see which way I'm headed as the week progresses. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. If you want access to the sheets, optimizer ownership projections, cheat sheets, Discord community, and everything else, link is down below. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. Just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're new signing over on PrizePicks, you can get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. There's several good options on the slate at either price range. There's some good spend up, mid-range, and cheap quarterbacks this week. It just depends on which way you want to go with roster construction or stacks or whatever might be, cash or GPPs. Typically in cash games, I like to save a little bit of money unless it's like a rushing quarterback where I end up spending up a little bit for a guy like, let's say, Lamar Jackson last week versus Detroit, even though he didn't really kill it. But running quarterbacks definitely offer you more value, so I don't mind spending up a little bit for them. But up top, we have guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson. If I had to pick between any of the super expensive quarterbacks this week, I would say it's Josh Allen for me. The one scary thing is that this game does feature a 16.5 point spread in the Bills' favor, which when I roster quarterbacks or just really offensive pieces from the passing game, I want it to be a tight spread so the game is back and forth and they'll let off the gas. Unfortunately, versus the Texans, I could see this being a blowout. Although they did kind of blow out Washington last week and they still had over 40 fantasy points, kind of his first big game of the season. That's like 2020 Josh Allen vibes we saw last week. But 4 touchdowns, nearly 360 passing yards, threw the ball over 40 times, which is what I want to see. I mean, the Bills aren't really that great of a running team, but I think Josh Allen's definitely going to have a pretty solid game here. Like, if they end up blowing out the Texans, which they probably will, they are large favorites here. It's probably because Josh Allen had a huge game through the air, whether it be with Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, or Stephon Diggs. So I think Josh Allen is a fine play. I think you can play him in cash games, although at $8,000, it's a pretty big price tag for what could be a blowout. And if they do happen to get to a blowout, it happens to be all rushing touchdowns, you're definitely going to be in trouble. So I think he's a better turn-up play than he is cash game play, but he will project very well this week. Matthew Stafford at $7,000. He went off last week versus Tampa Bay. 32 fantasy points, threw the ball nearly 40 times. Had a great game, 75-yard touchdown to Deshaun Jackson, and well over 300 passing yards. So I think he's a good option. The problem is he has pretty much no rushing upside. I can get Jalen Hurts for $100 cheaper, and a good matchup versus KC, what should be a very high-scoring game. I think there's a great matchup versus the Cardinals. They don't have a great secondary. I think Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods will have their way with them. So at $7,000, I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but I mean, the guy's going to play great football, I think, all season long. This Rams team is, I think, the favorites to win the Super Bowl right now, and this should be a pretty high-scoring game with over a 50-point over-under, so I don't have any problems with Matthew Stafford, although at his price point, he feels like more of a tournament play now, because when he was in the mid-6K range to lower 6K range, yeah, I think you can play that in cash games. He just doesn't offer you any rushing upside, but he's always going to have 300-yard plus passing upside each and every single week, so Stafford's definitely on my radar once again, although I don't like him as much as I did last week. But the guy I'm probably just going to roll with in cash games this week, it's going to be Jalen Hurts here versus KC. They've really struggled defensively so far this season. Justin Herbert had a great game. Baker Mayfield looked good in week 1. And you had Lamar Jackson in week 2. So I think Jalen Hurts is going to continue it. I like this price point quite a bit. He started off terrible versus Dallas last week, but in the second half, he definitely righted the ship. Had over 300 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Only had 35 rushing yards, which is a bit low for a guy like Jalen Hurts, but the rushing upside's there every single week, which makes him a super safe play. And as far as cash games go, Jalen Hurts is like the great value brand version of guys like Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray, and I think this is a fair price point. This game does feature a 54.5 point over, 7.5 point spread here in the Chiefs' favor, so they should be playing from behind, which is fine for me. Jalen Hurts, I'm sure we'll have plenty of scramble opportunities, and they should throw the ball close to 40 times in this game if they are trailing. And I mean, good matchup versus KC. They are terrible versus the run. We saw Lamar Jackson have over 100 rushing yards versus them, and Jalen Hurts is one of the best rushing quarterbacks in football, so I think he definitely makes a lot of sense here in cash games. You don't have to pair any wide receivers up with him if you don't want to, because I think he's a fine quarterback to use naked just due to his rushing ability, but I do think he makes a lot of sense in cash games this week. If you are looking for an even cheaper option though, Sam Darnold here versus Dallas in what should be a decently high scoring game. Plus Dallas has not been very good versus quarterbacks so far. Sam Darnold's been looking pretty good. He scored at least 20 points each and every single game this season. No, he's not going to get 2 rushing touchdowns each and every single week like he did last week versus Houston, but even then, he was still over 300 passing yards, which he was in week 2 versus New Orleans, which was actually a decently tough matchup there, and then 280 yards versus his old team, the New York Jets, in week 1, so Sam Darnold, I mean, without CMC, they're going to have to rely on the air a little bit more. So if you want to roster Sam Darnold, I don't mind that at all. And moving on to the running back position, up top we have King Henry, 8,800 bucks, pretty similar spot like he was in last week. He's not playing at home, but he's still playing as a favorite. Not really scared of the Jets defense here. And he's the volume king. You can never go wrong with Derrick Henry. The problem is if he does not get to the end zone, he's going to have a hard time paying off his price point because he's not an elite pass catching option. Although this season he is now being used in the passing game. Like in the past, he's been like a 5% target share kind of guy. So far this season, we're talking around 10 to 12% for his target share, which I'm not sure if it's going to keep up all season long, but what we've seen so far is definitely very encouraging because it does give him a floor they didn't used to have in years past. 4 targets, 6 targets, 3 targets through the first 3 weeks. And last week, he did not get into the end zone, but he still scored you 22.4 fantasy points. He did get a 2-point conversion, which kind of helped as well. But 28 carries on the ground, like no other running back is getting volume like he does on a week-per-week basis. Yes, there's some times where a running back will get a lot of carries, but Derrick Henry is like the one running back that you can count on that's going to get a ton of work on the ground each and every single week. So if you just want to lock in the volume each and every single week, I get it. I think Henry's fine in cash games, although I think we can save some money at the running back position this week and find some good mid-range plays. Not saying I won't be playing Henry this week, and it's still only Tuesday morning, so a lot can change throughout the week. But right now, I'm not going to plug in Derrick Henry. I think he's a fine option. The volume is obviously as safe as ever if you do roster Derrick Henry, but I'm going to bypass that for now. We have Alvin Kamara versus the Giants. I'm not loving that spot there. I'm just not a big fan of the Saints offense right now. Najee Harris, I feel like needs talked about a little bit just because Green Bay typically is a team that does struggle versus running backs. And last week, Najee Harris had 19 targets. Yeah, for a running back, that's pretty good. 19 targets, 14 catches. Once again, was terrible on the ground. That offensive line is terrible. I believe he's getting hit before he reaches on a scrimmage on 70% of his attempts. I believe I saw on PFF, which is obviously the highest rate in the entire league. Like, the offensive line is definitely brutal. 40 yards in week 3, 38 yards in week 2, 45 yards in week 1. We're talking like around 3 yards per carry, which it's very bad. But he's doing some work in the passing game, which does make him viable. Over 100 receiving yards last week. Now, we can't bank on him getting nearly 20 targets each and every single week. That's probably more of an anomaly than anything. But he's going to be used in the passing game. He had a receiving touchdown in week 2. With the Steelers being on the road here versus Green Bay, they should be trailing for the most part. So it could be a lot of Najee Harris dump-offs once again. I mean, Big Ben looks terrible back there. So if he's just going to get a bunch of dump-offs all game, I don't mind Najee Harris here in what should be a plus matchup versus Green Bay. It's hard to bank on him doing anything on the ground. At some point, the rushing touchdowns would be there, which, I mean, hopefully. I know the offensive line is bad, but at some point, he's going to get you a rushing touchdown, which is obviously going to help over on DK. 1,600 bucks. I think he's fine. Just feels a bit pricey for a guy that cannot get anything going on the ground right now. But his receiving upside definitely makes him somewhat of a solid option here. And Saquon Barkley at 6,700 bucks. He looked good in week 3 versus Atlanta. Alexander Mattison was excellent. I mean, excellent versus Seattle. The problem is, not sure if Dalvin Cook is going to be playing or not. I mean, just the fact that it was a game time decision in week 3 makes me think he's probably going to trend towards playing in week 4. We'll have to see. But if Dalvin Cook happens to be out, Alexander Mattison, even though the price would rise a little bit, he would definitely be in play for me versus Cleveland just because he was using the passing game quite a lot in week 3, which definitely boosted his floor. Still at over 100 rushing yards, but that work he saw in the receiving game was definitely really nice. Zeke looked pretty good last night. If you guys watched the Monday Night Football game, Miles Sanders, it's a good matchup versus KC. They're like 32nd DVA versus the run right now, but since I already have Jalen Hurts, I don't think it makes much sense to want to play Miles Sanders. But DeAndre Swift is the guy that I think is going to be playable each and every single week because he's getting a ton of work in the passing game right now. Through 3 weeks, we're talking 11 targets, 5 and 7. Still gets some carries on the ground, but what he's doing through the receiving game right now is definitely boosting his floor quite a bit. 24, 11, and 23 fantasy points. Matchup versus Chicago isn't exactly great. I do have a lot of interest in David Montgomery, who's a bit cheaper. You can play both running backs in the same game just because DeAndre Swift is going to be used as a pass-catching option, so it doesn't really correlate that poorly. But I think DeAndre Swift at that price point, I assume he's going to grade out pretty well in my projections this week, especially on a point-per-dollar basis, so he's definitely someone to keep your eye on. Not sure if I'll put him in this lineup. If he fits at the end, great, but if not, don't think it's the end of the world. Chuba Hubbard here, 5,900 bucks. He saw around 70% of the snaps once CMC went down. I can only assume he's going to be the lead back here, and this is a pretty good matchup versus Dallas. Plus, he's going to be using the passing game. Did have 5 targets last week, so the RB1 for Carolina team that is 3-0 right now. But Hubbard's going to be used pretty much everywhere, so at 5,900 bucks, as far as cash games go, for right now, we'll plug him in. This might change throughout the week. I don't really think Chuba Hubbard's that great of a running back, but really expected volume, good matchup, below 6K. Kind of a similar situation to Alexander Mattison last week. So we'll plug him in for right now. Plus, he does have pass catching upside, which can boost his floor, especially if he gets more of a CMC role. Although he's not the only running back here, as Royce Freeman did see some work last week. Then David Montgomery at 5,800 bucks. I feel like he's going to be the chalky cash game running back this week. I know the Bears were terrible last week. I think Justin Fields had, 29 passing yards, only completed 6 passes, got sacked 9 times. It was a brutal day for the Bears offense. I think I only saw them in the red zone, once the entire game, if I remember correctly. I don't even think it ended in a touchdown. I think it was which I think only ended in a field goal. But he's facing Detroit now, much softer matchup. There's no Myles Garrett, Jadeveon Clowney on the opposite side, so I think they're going to be just fine here. And David Montgomery, assuming he gets more than 10 carries for 34 yards, he should be able to find his way into the end zone. Detroit is terrible versus running backs. They were terrible last year. Not very good once again, so I think David Montgomery definitely a very solid option here for the $100, especially in cash games, because he should get you, I'd say he's going to get around 20 total touches here. He's using the passing game, and at $5,100, good matchup versus Detroit as a home favorite. I think he makes plenty of sense there. And if we go this route, we're talking under 7K quarterback, 2 solid running backs below $6,000. We actually have a pretty flexible lineup here. We can probably do whatever the heck we want with it because we still have a cheap defense and more than likely a cheaper tight end. And moving on to the wide receiver position, I always say it just depends on what quarterback you're using. Because if you're using Jalen Hurts this week, I said you can play him naked, but just for the sake of correlation in this lineup, I like to pair him with one of his pass-catching options, whether it be Smith, Reagor, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, or whoever it may be. Greg Ward even got a touchdown last night at the very end, garbage time. But if we do that, then I want to run back with one of the Chiefs option, hoping this game's a shootout. So either Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, Travis Kelce, or whoever it may be. There's really not many options outside of those guys, but I think you guys get the idea there. You could even use a running back. I mean, assuming they had to lead the entire game, then the Eagles have to play catch-up, although I like to more so get a pass-catching option there. So with Jalen Hurts, like I said, we can play him naked. You don't have to do this, but just for the sake of this lineup, let's throw in Devontae Smith here, $5,300. He was terrible last night. If you guys watched that Cowboys versus Eagles game, you can only hope he's going to bounce back here. $5,700. I know Jalen Reagor had the better game, but I think he'll be just fine here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. He had 6 targets last week, 7 the week prior, 8 the week before that. He still leads the team in target share. He was at 27% heading into Monday night. Hadn't updated those numbers yet, but he's still the most targeted wide receiver on this team, and he's definitely the one I would want the most. So just to pair him up with Jalen Hurts, I think that's fine. Hopefully he can bounce back after a rough last 2 weeks. He was great in week 1, got into the end zone, but the past 2 weeks have definitely been a bit rough. Now at this point, I like to run back with a Chiefs option. We can either go Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. The problem is both of those guys are super, super expensive, so maybe we save some money and go with a guy like Mecole Hardman. He's only $4,400. I realize right now the Philadelphia Eagles are allowing the least amount of points to fantasy wide receivers, and even all the wide receivers for Dallas yesterday busted. CeeDee Lamb had barely any points. I think he only had like 60 or 66 yards. Almost got into the end zone on like the first drive, but got tackled on the one, and Zeke got the rushing touchdown at the very end. And then Amari Cooper did nothing. Cedric Wilson got to the end zone, but he still only finished with around 9 fantasy points. And Noah Brown had like a 1 catch, but that was just about it. So I don't know, they've been tough versus wide receivers this season. I don't think it's going to continue. Mecole Hardman last week, 4 targets, got into the end zone. Before that, had 8 targets, 10.5 fantasy points. I think he's a fine option. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to afford a guy like Tyreek Hill in this lineup, because if we go the Tyreek Hill route, it's only going to leave us around $4,500 left per player, which once you factor in a cheaper defense and a cheaper tight end, it's not as bad as you think. So we'll roll with it. Hope it fits at the end. If not, we'll play around with it. Maybe we could drop the Mecole Hardman or whatever it may be. But I do like Tyreek Hill in tournaments. I know he's kind of been very underwhelming the past 2 weeks, but he was explosive in week 1. And I mean, Tyreek Hill was just, it only takes 1 play for him to break his slate. So we'll leave him in there because it makes sense having the Hurts and Smith stack ran back with one of the best wide receivers in football, most exciting players in football, especially for tournaments, in Tyreek Hill. So after that, we're going to have to find some cheaper wide receivers. A guy I definitely have interest in this week is going to be Robert Woods at only $5,300. I realize Cooper Kupp is the better wide receiver in this offense. He has a better connection with Matthew Stafford, and he's the one you want. But at this point, Cooper Kupp is close to $8,000, which I think is definitely deserved. Cooper Kupp has been amazing so far. He's had like 2 30-point outings and a near 40-point outing through 3 weeks. He leads the league in target share, at least heading into last week. I'll have to double check and see if he still leads the league in target share. But I mean, he has been incredible this season, Robert Woods. Not so much. He's still getting targets, 4, 9, and 6 the past 3 weeks, but the fantasy points haven't really been there, and he's not really getting anything in the yards department. He had 64 yards in week 2, but outside of that, it hasn't really been anything too impressive. But this is a weak Arizona secondary. They're going to more than likely really try to stop Cooper Kupp and hopefully bracket him out, so Robert Woods should see some softer coverage, which Robert Woods is a good wide receiver. And at some point, it's going to balance out. I don't think Cooper Kupp's going to keep putting out 30, 40 points each and every single week. Robert Woods is going to start getting some of that share. And I would like to be ahead of the curve, especially when his price is pretty low. So nearly $3,000 cheaper than Cooper Kupp, and what should be a plus matchup in a very high-scoring game. I will take Robert Woods here at $5,300. So now we have $4,100 left per player, 3 spots left. We could use a cheap tight end, cheap defense, and then we could probably get a pretty solid flex there. As far as defense goes, I really hate talking about defenses. If I could just plug in the cheapest defense each and every single week, I would do it, because it's just mainly luck-based in terms of getting defensive touchdowns or whatnot. Like the Jags had a 109-yard field goal kick return touchdown. the Cardinals defense had a pick six. Like, it's all about just getting a lucky touchdown for the most part, or just getting a ton of turnovers and sacks, which are easier to project. I mean, depending on what quarterback you're facing. But for right now, let's just throw in. I don't want to play the Jets versus Tennessee. I don't really want to play the Texans versus Buffalo, 17-point dogs on the road. Eagles defense, no thank you, especially doesn't really even make sense of the stack that we have, especially versus the Chiefs. So you could use the Lions versus the Chicago Bears, although we already have David Montgomery, so I don't think that makes too much sense. Maybe the Colts here versus Jacoby Brissett. Still no Tua. I don't think Brissett was terrible last week, but I don't hate the Colts. They're on the road. I wish they were at home, but $2,700, I don't think it's the worst thing you could do. And once you plug them in, you have $4,000 left. We could use one of Jalen Hurts' tight ends because we can't afford Travis Kelce. We already have Tyreek Hill, so I think we're kind of maxed out on that. So we could use Zach Ertz. I mean, he was good last night. He had over a handful of targets, got into the end zone, was fine in the yards department. I'm not sure if that's going to continue, but he's on the field playing snaps, and he's dirt cheap. At 7 targets, 53 yards, and got to the end zone as well, so at a 27-yard catch. I know he's big-time washed, but at $3,500, it's not a bad, cheap pass-catching option to pair with our quarterback in this lineup, and it just makes sense with the stack we have. And that gives us $6,200 left for the flex spot, which I think there's several pretty solid options here. We have Antonio Gibson versus Atlanta, had that long touchdown last week. We actually have DeAndre Swift, who I like a lot. We already talked about him. I know we already have David Montgomery, but since he's a pass-catching option, I don't think he correlates poorly since we already have David Montgomery, and I don't think it's a bad-looking lineup. If you don't want to go the DeAndre Swift route, we also have Odell Beckham Jr. here at $5,000. He made his return last week from injury after the ACL tear last week in, week 6 or 7 versus the Bengals. Had 9 targets, 77 yards, didn't get to the end zone, but 13.7 fantasy points. This is a really good matchup versus Minnesota. Over a 50-point over-under. It's only a 2-point spread. Should be pretty back and forth. Also playing in the dome, so I don't think Odell's a bad option there in the flex spot if you want to swap out DeAndre Swift. It leaves you a little bit more money on the table, and you don't have that 3 running back build, but I think Odell is perfectly fine this week, and at that price point, definitely think he becomes viable. But there's many ways you can go this week. I think it's definitely shaping up to be a fun one. But if you did find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. There's you versus the projections, and as of right now, if you're new signing over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be it. I will stop rambling, and I'll see you guys in the next video.